WBO World Heavyweight Champion by the name of Joseph Parker out of Auckland, New Zealand, managed to get a majority decision over Andy Ruiz Jr. in what I thought was a pretty close competitive fight. And a fight actually that I scored for Andy Ruiz Jr. I had it 115 to 113 for Andy Ruiz, but there was a lot of close rounds. It was overall a pretty close fight, a lot more of a technical, kind of a cautious fight from both fighters by and large, as opposed to the heavyweight slugfest that most people like to think about when they think about heavyweight boxing. The big punches, knockouts, and such. A lot more of a technical kind of here and there, not especially active fight, and really not a tremendous amount of truly heavy punches landed, or at least not from the looks of it, in terms of neither fighter ever really being all hurt all that badly throughout the fight. I actually thought that it was going to be Joseph Parker that got off to the faster start, and then Andy Ruiz who would be able to pick it up in the middle rounds to make it a close fight. I was pretty 50-50 on it for the most part going into it, especially after Parker weighed in a bit heavier than I'm used to seeing him. I think normally he's pretty much at his best, at his optimal weight in about the mid 230s, whereas here he was 246. Andy Ruiz was also a little bit heavier than he probably would be optimally, but only about 5 pounds as opposed to 10 pounds for Joseph Parker. Ruiz was 255 and change, and normally he's usually at his best in the high 240s or about 250. But it was actually Ruiz who got off to a little bit of the quicker start. It seemed like his hand speed was really troublesome for Parker at first. Parker seemed very tentative, and Ruiz was kind of pushing him back. He was kind of walking him down. Parker seemed like he really wasn't putting a whole hell of a lot on his shots. He was kind of slapping with a lot of his shots and really wasn't turning him over. He was just kind of throwing them out there in order to try to give Ruiz something to think about more so than really trying to hurt Ruiz. Whereas Ruiz's shots, they were coming quick and snappy. And even though he's not the heaviest handed guy, he's not necessarily just a all out thudding knockout puncher. He's a guy that where his power comes from his speed. His power comes from the fact that he'll catch you by surprise with a lot of those real snappy shots, especially when he throws in 2, 3, 4 punch combinations, which he's really good at doing. I think the problem for Ruiz started to come when Parker started to manage to get the distance a little bit better, probably starting around round 4. With the jab, he started jabbing a bit more, putting a little bit more just emphasis on that jab, a little bit more oomph on it, a little bit more power on it, leveraging it a little bit better, and not necessarily just allowing Ruiz to get so much forward momentum on him. In those early rounds, I actually did see, I thought Ruiz did momentarily stun Parker, at least with one of those left hooks. But Parker was doing a fairly good job of kind of rolling away from him. And once he started to get the distance around round 4, I thought he swept the next few rounds after that, just by virtue of the fact that he was able to kind of keep distance on Ruiz. And it seemed like Ruiz was either being a little bit overly tentative, possibly because he felt some of the power of Joseph Parker. It's entirely possible that Parker really truly is the heavy-handed guy that he's kind of been built up to be, and that we've seen him to be somewhat. He's knocked out most of his top level opposition, albeit not Carlos Takam, and that was his toughest fight before this one, really. But he definitely has serious power, and I think that along with the fact that who knows, maybe Ruiz wasn't the best condition for this fight, started to slow down, and it definitely dropped Ruiz's offensive output. Anytime they engaged in an exchange, however, I thought Ruiz was getting the better of it. There was only maybe 1 or 2 exchanges where I thought Parker actually managed to win the exchange. By and large, whenever they would trade punches, it was Ruiz with the quicker shots, the shorter shots, and just the cleaner landing shots. For the most part, Parker would miss his, Ruiz would land his. Or even if they both landed, usually like Parker would land 1 and Ruiz would land 3 or 4 in the midst of an exchange. So Ruiz definitely had an advantage there. When Parker was able to keep it more at a mid to long range distance, though, Ruiz really didn't have as much for him, just because of the fact that he would really have to lunge in and reach in order to just try to hit him with one shot, as opposed to being able to rattle off the combinations that Ruiz is very, very much known for when he gets on the inside. He's a very dangerous fighter on the inside, but if you're able to keep distance on him, that level of danger decreases immensely. Parker managed to pick it up definitely in the mid rounds. I did think Ruiz started to pick it back up in the later rounds. I actually had him sweeping the last three. But there were several swing rounds that could have gone either way in this fight, and so that's why I'm not particularly bothered by the majority decision going to Parker. It was a close fight. It was definitely a drawish type fight. Could have gone either way depending on how exactly how you scored some of those rounds, and the rounds were close enough that it did. I think you could pretty much argue several of them either way, and like the third round, the sixth round, the 10th round. In particular, are ones that kind of stand out to me just from memory of the way the fight went. But I mean, it wasn't necessarily the most exciting fight. It was, a pretty cautious fight from two guys who I think knew could kind of hurt each other, and so they really didn't go all out on the offensive side as much as they played it kind of safe. They played it, close to the chest by and large, both fighters basically. And it's kind of a shame, especially for Andy Ruiz, because I think that had he been a bit more active in a few of those rounds, he would have got the decision. Because just technically speaking, he seemed like the better fighter to me. He seemed like the guy that really knew what he was doing better. Was landing the better shots. Like I said, in the exchanges, he would win. But the main problem with him is he was fighting way too much in spurts, whereas Parker was able to kind of consistently fight for 2 to 3 minutes of every round. Ruiz would only fight maybe about 30 seconds to a minute of some of those rounds, and so he wound up losing some rounds that he probably otherwise could have won, or otherwise could have won more emphatically in order to get the decision. Of course, like I said, it was a majority decision, so one judge had it a draw. The other two had it 115 and 113 for Parker. I scored it 115 and 113 for Ruiz, but like I said, it's a close fight. It'll be interesting to see exactly what goes on from here for both fighters. So, supposedly, Hughie Fury is going to be the mandatory opponent for Joseph Parker. I think that's a very interesting fight and a potentially very entertaining fight. Fury's a bit more of an aggressive type guy, and Parker likes to be aggressive as well. I favor Hughie Fury in that fight, though. I think Hughie Fury is very much the goods. He's a pretty impressive fighter. Tyson Fury is a very good boxer. I think Hughie Fury has a lot of those same abilities. But I also think that he's a little bit more on the offensive side compared to Tyson. I think Tyson tends to be a bit more defensive than Hughie, and so I think that in particular will help Hughie against somebody like Parker, who tends to be a little bit skittish when somebody's really throwing and trying to throw when he throws. It seems like he's definitely open to counter punches, which Ruiz kind of exposed, which Carlos Takam had exposed back when he fought him. And I think that Fury could potentially expose them in such a fashion that he may be able to get an emphatic knockout or otherwise just a victory. But that's of course for the future. Of course, you got to give props to both fighters as of now, Parker and Ruiz. Um, as for Ruiz, I wouldn't be surprised if he was to get another good fight against another top level opponent, just by virtue of the fact that a lot of these guys, they tend to kind of mix and match against each other's past opponents. Of course, Joshua with Molina today as well, and just a lot of times fighters they'll kind of get like recycled back into title contention, just as a measure of how some of the other peers who are trying to fight some of the other elite fighters are trying to compare themselves to. So you got Joshua trying to compare himself to Wilder. You got Luis Ortiz out there probably trying to compare himself to some of the other top fighters. David Hayes still out there. Vladimir Klitschko coming back fairly soon as well. But that's pretty much all I got to say about it. I personally, like, I wouldn't mind seeing Andy Ruiz against Luis Ortiz, for instance. I think that's a solid fight. Be interesting to see exactly where Ortiz is at in relation to some of the other heavyweights. You saw a little bit of that with Bryant Jennings, and I wouldn't mind necessarily seeing it again. I think that's actually a pretty good fight. I think the way that the styles match up, that it'd be a good fight. Ruiz wouldn't be running around just trying to survive, and the same for Ortiz. He wouldn't necessarily just be as cautious as Parker was. I don't think. I think it'll be that is a potentially exciting fight. And as for Parker, I mean, like I said, Hughie Fury, I think makes for a better stylistic matchup in terms of just viewership. So that's all I got to say on this one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.